The company reporting adjusted earnings of 68 cents, which missed expectations. However, there were some legal expenses in that might not have been expected by all the analysts on the street. Walmart raising its full year outlook, even saying that costs from tariffs continue to rise, but it's still raising its outlook. And that stock right now down by about 2.8%. Joining us right now is
earnings kick off in earnest next week with Target and Walmart among the key names reporting. Investors focusing in on what the retailers have to say about the consumer and the impact of tariffs so far. Walmart shares are up over 10% this year, helped along by its e-commerce and grocery businesses, while the more discretionary focused Target has dropped nearly 24%. So for more on what to expect from these companies, Mizuho senior analyst David Bellinger joins us here on set. David, thank you.
The higher the tariff, the more likely it is to have them come into the
higher the tariff, the more you're going to put on the value of that piece, those goods, the higher people are going to pay in shops.
Ready? The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
That will take many, as you know, that will take many years.
In fact, I'll tell you, there's another theory is that the tariff, you make it so high, so horrible, so obnoxious that they'll come right away. When I do the 10%, 10% is really, first of all, 10% when you collect it is hundreds of billions of dollars. The numbers that you're talking, all reducing our deficit. But really, so there's two ways of looking at a tariff. You can do it as a money-making instrument, or you can do it as something to get the companies. Now, if you want the companies to come in, the tariff has to be a lot higher than 10%, because 10% is not enough. Guys, they're not going to do it for 10. But you make a 50% tariff, they're going to come in.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters of Africa and beyond, let me ask you a question that will shake you to your core. How does a 25 billion corporation, a giant, a titan, the so-called king of global retail, get humiliated on the soil it thought it could dominate with ease? How does the mighty Walmart, the face of American capitalism, the pride of Wall Street, get told one word by Africa no and suddenly the entire world shifts in shock? This is not just a story of a rejected deal. This is a story of power, of pride, of sovereignty, and of a continent that has finally found its voice. When Africa looked Walmart in the eye and rejected its $25 billion proposal, the echo of that decision traveled far beyond the boardrooms of New York and Washington. It rattled investors on Wall Street. It panicked the corridors of power in the White House. It sent a message across Asia, Europe, and Latin America. Africa is no longer the quiet follower in global trade. Africa is the leader, the disruptor, the game changer. And make no mistake, America did not see this coming. For decades, Walmart has conquered markets from Mexico to China, from Chile to South Africa, wiping out local businesses, undermining farmers, and dictating the prices of everyday goods. Wherever Walmart set foot, governments bent, economies reshaped themselves, and small shopkeepers shuttered their doors. But in Africa, something different happened. For the first time in its history, Walmart met a force it could not crush. It met a continent that said, "Enough is enough." Think about the audacity of this moment. The United States believed Africa would welcome this deal with open arms because that is how it has always worked. They thought a wave of billions would blind us, silence us, and control us. They thought we would trade our sovereignty for their dollars. But Africa stood firm because we have learned from history. We know that every partnership with America is simply another word for exploitation. And here is the truth that America does not want the world to hear. Walmart's rejection was not about economics, it was about dignity. It was about Africa refusing to be humiliated yet again. It was about saying to the United States, "You will not use our people, our farmers, our workers, our land, and then send the profits back overseas. Not anymore." That is why Washington is furious. That is why Wall Street is trembling, because they know what this rejection means. It means Africa has awakened. It means Africa is rewriting the rules of global trade. It means Africa is no longer begging for scraps at the global table. Africa is building its own table. Now, let me ask you this. If Africa can reject Walmart, the largest retailer in the world, what else can Africa reject? If we have the courage to say no to $25 billion today, what will stop us from saying no to $50 billion tomorrow? No to $100 billion? No to every single deal that seeks to strip us of our independence? This is why America is panicking, because this one decision, this one refusal has exposed the fragility of their dominance. It has shown that U.S. corporations are not invincible. It has shown that their grip on the global economy is slipping. And most importantly, it has proven that Africa, united and determined, is unstoppable. So let us be clear. Walmart's rejection is not just an African story, it is a global story. It is the first crack in the wall of U.S. corporate supremacy. It is the spark that could ignite revolutions in trade, in economics, and in politics across the world. And it all began here in Africa with leaders and people who dared to say one word to America's biggest corporation. No, this is the hook, the fire, the opening to a new chapter in history. A chapter where Africa is no longer a pawn, but a queen on the global chessboard. A chapter where America must face the truth. The age of domination is ending, and the age of African sovereignty has begun. Today I stand before you not to tell a story of defeat, but to declare a story of triumph. A triumph that sent shockwaves across Washington, rattled the boardrooms of America's largest corporations, and shook the very foundation of global economic arrogance. Yes, the headlines were real. The whispers in the corridors of Wall Street were true. Africa, long painted as the land of desperation, dependence, and exploitation, did the unthinkable. We looked at America's crown jewel, Walmart, the symbol of U.S. retail dominance, and when they came to us with their $25 billion deal, we stood united, we stood strong, and we said, no, for decades, Walmart has been more than just a store. To America, it is a behemoth, a monster that crushed competitors, dictated global supply chains, and fed off low wages and cheap imports. It grew fat on the backs of workers in Asia, Latin America, and Africa. It expanded like wildfire, entering every market it could touch, swallowing up smaller businesses and local industries in its path. And when Walmart's executives looked to Africa, they thought they saw yet another playground for plunder, another land where they could dump cheap products, destroy traditional markets, and extract billions in profits while leaving our communities hollow. But they underestimated us. They underestimated a continent that is no longer blind, no longer weak, no longer shackled by dependency. They underestimated a people who have learned from history, who have watched and studied the consequences of Walmart's expansion in other parts of the world. They underestimated the spirit of Africans who now say, enough is enough. Do you realize the scale of this? A $25 billion deal was not pocket change. It was meant to be Walmart's golden ticket into Africa's booming retail sector. They were ready to roll out megastores from Cairo to Cape Town, from Accra to Nairobi, flooding our markets with products sourced from abroad, undercutting our farmers, killing our local shops, and replacing African entrepreneurship with foreign monopolies. But Africa is no longer the Africa of the 1980s and 1990 seconds. No longer the Africa that signed every deal written in English or French without question. No longer the Africa that bowed at the feet of foreign corporations while our own industries withered away. No, this is a new Africa. An Africa of bold leadership, of young entrepreneurs, of local businesses that say, we will not surrender our markets to outsiders. We will build our own. And so, when Walmart came knocking, waving $25 billion like a golden carrot, leaders from across the continent met. They debated, they discussed, they consulted with unions, with farmers, with local shopkeepers, and with young entrepreneurs. And after days of deliberation, they delivered a unanimous verdict. Walmart's model is not welcome here. Can you imagine the fury in Washington? Can you imagine the panic in Wall Street? To them, Africa was supposed to be the last frontier, the market that would save their slowing retail empire. But to us, it was a test of sovereignty, a test of dignity, and we passed. Why did we reject them? Because Walmart is not just a store. It is a system designed to dominate, to crush, and to control. In country after country, Walmart enters with promises of jobs and development, but the result is always the same. Small businesses collapse, workers are underpaid, local industries vanish, and profits are shipped back to America. We studied their history in Mexico, where Walmart entered and devastated local shops, leaving millions unemployed. We saw what happened in South America, where Walmart's arrival weakened national industries. We looked at their own home, the United States, where Walmart has been accused of exploiting workers, refusing to pay living wages, and driving entire communities into poverty, while the Walton family, its owners, sits on hundreds of billions of dollars. So tell me, my brothers and sisters, why should Africa invite such a system into our home? Why should we allow ourselves to be enslaved again this time, not with chains and guns, but with cheap goods and economic domination? This rejection was not just about a deal. It was about drawing a line in the sand. It was about saying to America, your corporations no longer dictate Africa's destiny. It was about reminding the world that Africa has power, and when united, Africa can say no and the world must listen. And here is the irony. When Walmart was rejected, something unexpected happened. Instead of chaos, Africa's local markets flourished. Farmers began to supply directly to regional stores. Local shopkeepers saw a surge in demand. Young African tech entrepreneurs launched digital platforms for e-commerce, creating jobs and opportunities that Walmart would have suffocated. The very act of saying no created a new energy, a new confidence across the continent. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Dakar to Dar es Salaam, the message spread. If we can say no to Walmart, we can say no to anyone. And suddenly, America realized something terrifying: the myth of Africa's dependency had shattered. The narrative of Africa needs us was exposed as a lie. In truth, it is America that needs Africa. America needs our markets, our consumers, our raw materials, and our labor. Without Africa, Walmart's future crumbles. Without Africa, America's retail empire weakens. Without Africa, the illusion of U.S. economic supremacy collapses. But Africa will survive. Africa will thrive. Africa will build its own Walmart, its own Amazon, its own global retail networks rooted in fairness, rooted in dignity, rooted in Africa's own entrepreneurial genius. This is why the rejection of Walmart's $25 billion deal was not just a business story. It was a revolution that proved Africa is no longer the playground of foreign corporations, but the battlefield where sovereignty is defended. Make no mistake, America is furious that their crown jewel was humiliated. Furious that the world is watching Africa lead by example. Furious that a continent they once dismissed as weak now dares to stand tall. But that fury will not break us. It will only make us stronger, because the age of exploitation is over. The age of African submission is over, and the age of African economic independence has begun. Let us go deeper into what this rejection of Walmart truly means for Africa, because it is not only about a single corporation being denied entry. No, it is about the rebirth of African economics. It is about how one decision can ripple across industries, nations, and continents, reshaping the balance of power in ways the world never imagined possible. When our leaders stood up and said no to Walmart's $25 billion deal, they also said no to a whole system of neo-colonialism that has thrived on Africa's silence. For too long, the United States and its corporate giants have seen Africa as nothing more than a dumping ground, a place where low-quality goods can be sold at high prices, where local businesses can be crushed under the weight of foreign monopolies, and where profits can be siphoned away to enrich shareholders in faraway lands. But those days are gone. You see, Walmart's model is not innovation, it is domination. It is a machine designed to eat small businesses alive, to squeeze farmers until they can no longer breathe, and to strip nations of their independence in the name of globalization. If Africa had accepted this deal, it would not have been a partnership. It would have been a surrender. But Africa did not surrender, Africa rose. And that rising is what terrifies America, because for the first time in history, Africa is not waiting for foreign investment to dictate the rules. Instead, Africa is writing its own rules, shaping its own destiny, and deciding its own future. Let me tell you what happened after Walmart's rejection. Almost overnight, a wave of confidence swept across the continent. In Ghana, local cooperatives of farmers came together to launch their own distribution chains, selling produce directly to African-owned retail outlets. In Nigeria, small and medium-sized businesses once threatened by the shadow of Walmart began to see a surge in demand, as consumers proudly chose to support homegrown stores. In Kenya, young tech entrepreneurs launched digital shopping platforms connecting rural producers with urban markets, cutting out the need for multinational middlemen. And in South Africa, where Walmart once had a foothold through acquisitions, workers and unions organized to push back, demanding higher wages, fair treatment, and respect for African workers' dignity. This movement was not only economic, it was cultural, spiritual, and deeply political. The message was clear: Africa is not for sale. And yet, let us not forget how the United States responded, because make no mistake, Washington and Wall Street were not silent. When the rejection was announced, American officials scrambled to pressure African leaders behind closed doors. They whispered threats of aid cuts, of sanctions, of withheld loans. They reminded us of past dependencies, trying to force us back into fear. But this time, fear did not win. Instead, African leaders stood shoulder to shoulder and said, "We will not be bullied. We will not be threatened. We will not trade our sovereignty for your promises." And that unity, that spirit of African solidarity is what stunned the world. Because for decades, America has relied on the tactic of divide and conquer. They believed if they pressured one country, another would betray the cause. They believed Africa could never unite. But with Walmart's rejection, Africa proved them wrong. We showed that when our markets, our dignity, and our future are at stake, we can come together as one. And let us not underestimate the impact of this rejection on the global stage. Across Asia, across Latin America, leaders watched closely. They saw Africa, a continent once dismissed as the poorest of the poor, daring to defy America's biggest corporation. They saw Africa standing tall, unafraid, and unshaken. And suddenly, the myth of U.S. economic invincibility was shattered. In Beijing, in New Delhi, in Moscow, the reaction was the same. If Africa can reject Walmart, then the world can reject America's corporate domination. If Africa can say no, then others can too. And this is the nightmare scenario for America. Because Walmart is not just Walmart, it is a symbol of U.S. corporate power, a symbol of America's ability to dictate global trade, a symbol of its empire of consumption. To see that symbol humiliated by Africa is to see the beginning of the end of U.S. dominance. Now, let us talk about what this rejection did for our people on the ground. For decades, African farmers have been trapped in a vicious cycle. They work hard, they grow their crops, but they are forced to sell at unfair prices to foreign buyers who dictate the terms. With Walmart out of the picture, African farmers suddenly saw a new dawn. They began to supply local and regional chains, often at higher prices, with better contracts, and with more dignity. African shopkeepers, once worried about being wiped out by Walmart's cheap imports, breathed a sigh of relief. They knew that their businesses, built with sweat and sacrifice, would not be bulldozed overnight. African entrepreneurs, who feared they would be drowned out by Walmart's global brand, now saw opportunities to expand, to innovate, to create homegrown retail giants that could compete internationally. And here lies the greatest victory of all. By rejecting Walmart, Africa gave itself permission to dream bigger. We are not rejecting global trade. We are not rejecting foreign investment. No, what we are rejecting is exploitation, manipulation, and domination. What we are rejecting is the system where Africa is always the loser, and America is always the winner. And so, this rejection was not an act of isolation, but an act of liberation. It was Africa telling the world, if you want to do business with us, it must be on our terms. Fair terms, equal terms, respectful terms. But let us be clear, this is only the beginning. America will not accept this humiliation quietly. Already, they are plotting, strategizing, and scheming. They will try to return, perhaps with another corporation, perhaps under another disguise. They will attempt to infiltrate our markets through smaller deals, hoping we will not notice. They will use their media to paint Africa as anti-business and anti-investment. They will use their institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, and others to pressure us, to bribe us, to trap us in debt. But we must remain vigilant. We must remain united. We must remember that the true enemy is not just Walmart, but the system of exploitation it represents. Because today it is Walmart, tomorrow it will be Amazon, the next day it will be Exxon, then Google, then others. All of them come with the same goal, to control Africa's future, for America's benefit. But we now know the truth. We now know that Africa is strong enough to reject them. And so, let this rejection inspire us to go further. Let it inspire us to build our own continental supply chains, to strengthen intra-African trade, to launch African-owned mega retailers that rival Walmart, Carrefour, and Tesco. Let it inspire us to invest in our farmers, in our workers, in our entrepreneurs, so that the wealth of Africa remains in Africa. And above all, let it inspire us to protect our dignity, because no amount of money, not $25 billion, not $100 billion, not even $1 trillion can buy the soul of Africa. This is why the rejection of Walmart is not just a headline. It is history. It is the day Africa told America, we are no longer your playground. We are no longer your experiment. We are no longer your victim. We are Africa, and we will write our own destiny.